Hello, my name is Tristan Breedeman, and I will be your host. This is a show where we talk about what I love and what I'm passionate about. We're going to have on a variety of guests that are masters of their crafts, but also, they're just my friends. This is a show where we talk about anything and everything. Welcome to the Mancave podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Mancave podcast. I'm Tristan Breedeman, and across from me is my friend Brandon Walden. Welcome to the show, man. Thanks, me and Brandon, we go way back. So we used to, he used to come to the coffee shop, Stern Coffee House, where I was a barista, and I would always give you the most dirty looks, and I would be like, gosh, dang it, why is this guy in here?
I would walk in the door, and the greeting I would get from behind the coffee counter back there at the barista was, it just looked so miserable, and it was great. I think the first time you did that, we were like instant friends.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is my guy.
So recently I'd been, I had a birthday party, and do you give like prophetic words at our get-togethers and our birthday parties? Like the person that's highlighted, they get prophetic words from everyone. Cool. And a lot of people, they were saying, I had a Tristan, I knew I was in with Tristan moment. Yeah. Did you have that moment? And if so,
I think that might have been it, honestly.
Just like the, oh my gosh, this guy.
Oh, geez. Like, I mean, yeah, I think part of it is because not everybody appreciates that kind of humor.
Oh, yeah.
I love sarcasm. And so that was like instantly like, oh, okay. I don't really know if this guy likes me or not, but I like him. And so this is going to be fine. And the banter over I don't know how long you worked there.
I worked there for 7 years.
Well, I'm saying like in the time that I was there, probably like, when did you leave?
I left last March.
Okay, like a year ago, basically. Yeah. So for about 3 years, seeing you nearly every day in there, and getting the same kind of greeting, or like, oh God, there's Brandon. Some of the new baristas that would kind of come through, they'd be like, why are you being so mean to that guy?
I actually got a really bad review one time. I don't know if it was either you or Josh Johnson.
No, it was not me.
It wasn't Definitely. From you guys, but there was a customer in line, and they saw the interaction.
Oh my gosh, that's
and they were like, one of the baristas is so rude to his customers.
Oh, if they had only known.
If they had only known. So I actually got talking to from my manager at the time, like, hey, you can't do that. And I was hysterical. Like, I'm going to do it anyway because that's who I am. Exactly. That's what brings people in.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Yeah, I love that. That's probably, I would say that was kind of the moment. The second to that would be us ordering barbecue.
Oh, well,
yeah,
we love barbecue. Yeah, are you from Kansas?
I'm from South Carolina. I lived in Kansas City for 6 years.
So you know good barbecue.
I know good barbecue from both places. Fell in love with barbecue in Kansas City though. Enjoyed it as a kid. Went to but all we ever had as a kid was like ribs and pulled pork, and that was it. I moved to Kansas City and was suddenly like, what's a burnt end? What's brisket?
Yeah.
And then suddenly like everything just opened up in Kansas City. Obviously, it's known for barbecue. And it's weird because you kind of go through a phase, like in the 6 years I lived there was, I don't know, a number of like the local regular places that people would come through town and be like, oh, you've got to go to such and such. And I quickly found out that some of those places weren't like the best. Like it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's just not where I'm going to go. But then there was places like Joe's, like our Oklahoma Joe's, and it kind of branched off as Joe's. What's the one downtown?
Jack Stack?
Jack Stack. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean the first time I went there was for a business meeting with some guys, a company I was working with. These two guys took my brother and I out there, and they like ordered everything you could order. I mean, like there was like a lamb chop barbecue. It looked like Flintstones, kind of like bone and meat. And this, no joke, the size of my fist or larger, but barbecue lamb. I was just like, I've never had that in my life, and it just fell off the bone. And yeah, so I love barbecue.
We love barbecue.
Enough to where we're going to both say, we should just order some barbecue from Kansas City. Yeah. Everybody around me was like, that's so ridiculous. You guys are going to spend $150 to just get some barbecue from Kansas City? To ship
it from Kansas City.
Yeah. And we're like, yeah, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, it was an experience because you have to either overnight or 2-day it because it comes in a dry ice container.
Yeah.
And at this point, I just started getting into barbecue with Jason.
Yeah.
And I had ordered it from Kansas City because I was so curious, what's the hype for Kansas City barbecue?
Yeah.
And you're like, bro, you got to try burnt ends. So we ordered burnt ends from Oklahoma Joe's.
Yeah.
And I don't think it lasted more than 10 minutes on that table.
Oh, bro,
it was gone. It was a Father's Day special because we got an extra pound of burnt ends.
Yeah.
I remember that specifically, and it was gone.
And I remember watching you the first couple bites, you were just going like, I could tell you're like
it's
having
just like,
the moment.
It's just like meat candy that I absolutely fell in love with, like the first bite.
Yeah.
Jason, like we do Texas style, obviously, so there's not a lot of burnt ends.
Yeah.
But every now and then I'll go to the store and I'll get the point, which is like that bigger, fattier part, and I'll cook it up myself and I'll just eat. Oh man, gosh.
It's so good, man. It's so good. And the sauces in Kansas City are like, that's a lot of what you get flavor wise is in the sauce, not as much as the rubs. It's like Texas is very much rub based. Like if you put sauce on it, like cool, but you don't even have to. Like Jason's stuff, it's like you can just slice that and be like, this is delicious without anything on it. In Kansas City, I don't know that would always be the case, but the sauces are so good and
they're so good. Like it has so much flavor in itself.
Yeah.
So Brandon, you are an author.
That's one of the things.
That's one of the things you do. And I want to touch on that. You came up with a book. What is the seeds
and trees.
Seeds and trees. That's what. Hey Eli, can you pull up that book real quick? Everyone need to buy this book for your kids because it is incredible.
Thanks,
what
man.
kind of inspired that?
Oh man, there's so many ways I could go with this answer. I'm trying to decide. We've already cleared how deep we can go, which is we can go.
We can go deep as we want.
All right, so let's go deep. So this would be a bit of a long form trying to get there, and I'm an author and I like words, so I talk a lot.
I love listening.
I appreciate that.
Oh, here we go. Seeds and Trees. Brandon Walden. Go buy this book. Best-selling author Brandon Walden here.
Thanks, bro.
We are blessed to have you in this podcast studio right now. But go buy this. It is incredible. All my friends that are parents read this book to their kids.
Yeah, man.
So go ahead. Amazon Seeds and Trees by Brandon Walden.
Bro, and the illustration, shout out to Kevin and Kristen, our illustrators. They were friends of ours from Kansas City. They are like world-class illustrators.
That's incredible.
The artwork in this book is so gorgeous. I cannot tell you how many books I've sold just by showing somebody the book or them seeing it on the table and being like, what is that? I want to buy it for my house.
Well, because kids also are very visual learners.
Oh, yeah.
So when they associate with a really nice picture with the words, it's just lands that much deeper.
Transition
I know.
That to this.
To the Sasquatch, man. I love that.
Could we have not done some kind of fade, slow, subtle fade? But
no.
Suddenly you're like, ruh.
Yeah. This is the man cave. It's all up in your face.
It's all good, man. So the shortest version of this it started way back, and I was reminded of this whenever I released the book, and I was about to turn 40 the following year. I was thinking back of like, what am I at 40 years old? You're kind of going through this, like, what am I doing with my life?
It's called the midlife crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, how did I get here? Is this even where I want to be? And all that stuff. And I remember thinking about high school. I took a lot of visual arts classes. I actually took like all the arts classes that they offered and then all the AP art classes. And then my senior year, my art teacher was like, just do whatever you want to do, Brandon. You've taken all the classes, like paint, draw, sculptures, whatever. And I was fairly gifted in that. That was like my aspiration. I wanted to actually become an art therapist. That was my thought.
What's an art therapist?
So art therapist is psychology, if you will, for children. Like I wanted to do it with children primarily, but it's basically using arts to help people communicate how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you'll go into these moments where like a kid that might have trauma or whatever that they're dealing with is suffering through like, I don't really know how to express how I'm feeling. So the art therapist might say to a child like, hey, why don't you draw a picture of your family? And suddenly they'll draw a picture and like clearly one character is different than the others. Like, well, why'd you draw that character different? Like it might kind of open up conversation.
That's really interesting.
It's really fascinating. Back, again, 20 plus years ago when I was in high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with art. I was just going to go to art school because I had scholarships for art. And my art teacher like handed me this flyer. She was like, you should look into this. This is called art therapy. I think you'd be great at it. And I remember thinking like as a young, 16, 17, 18 years old, like, oh, I would really love, this was my, like, I think internally was like, wow, I'd love to create art that actually healed in some way. That would be really cool. And if it could help people. And I had not really opened up at all at the time, but I was hurting, like internally. I was dealing with a whole bunch of stuff and trauma and things I had never expressed. So I think in some way there was this connection to like, I kind of need that as well. And maybe in the process of seeking out how to learn to do that for others, maybe I could find some healing in my own. Fast forward, I graduated high school. I gave up art scholarships to go to YWAM and to travel the world. And then I gave up art entirely, visual arts, and just threw myself into music, which became another passion. And fast forward, I'm 40 years old, 39 years old when I was releasing the book, as a father, and seeing my children, like the effects of even my own words on their lives, how it was impacting them. And even some trauma they had experienced in different ways, whether that be by me or others. And it's strange. I was sitting in church in Kansas City one day. One of my buddies was preaching. And it's such a silly story to say about him, because I get to the church. It's like, oh, Sean's preaching. That's cool. I've never heard him speak at the church. He starts talking. And the moment he started talking, I just had this moment of like inspiration. I didn't really know. I couldn't express it. I don't really, to this day, really know how to articulate it. But I got out my iPhone, opened up the notes, and I started like writing. And I started writing this story. And for like 45 minutes, the whole like time, 45 minutes, however long he was preaching. And by the time he was done, I was done. And I'd written basically the entire story, minus edits. I mean, it needed a lot of work. Still does. But yeah, it's one of those things about art. It's like never really done. But at the time, when I was writing it, I didn't actually really know what I was writing. And when I say that, I mean like, I didn't know if it was a story. I didn't know if it was a poem. I didn't know if it was just some free writing creative exercise. And I honestly didn't know what I was writing in sense of what I was actually saying. Mm-hmm. The words were coming, and the story and the kind of the creative metaphor of, oh, this is about words and the power, good seeds, bad seeds, good trees, bad trees. Cool. That's, and it was fascinating to me, but it was almost like, I don't know another word. It was almost like revelatory to me, even as I was writing it. I was kind of going, oh, wow, that's true. And so it wasn't like I sat down one day, I was like, I'm going to write a really cool book about the power of words, and it's going to be this great metaphor. It was like, it came as this download of a moment. And, when I first wrote it, I went home from church that day. My wife was home with a couple of our kids. One of them was sick and, or something, and she had to stay home. And so I come home and I read it to my wife. I'm like, hey, I wrote this thing during church today. I want to read it to you. And I go read it to her, and she starts crying. And at one point she said something like, yeah, Brandon, this is gold. And I was like, oh, that's, that was like a sweet compliment. And then she's like, no, like, I feel like this is something that you're meant to steward. Like if it was gold. And I'd been an entrepreneur. I'd started businesses and stuff over the years. I had never considered promoting or creating like an artistic piece and doing anything like business wise with it. So it was kind of counter. And even culturally, there's almost like the stigma of art and like, don't sell out and don't, whatever. But my wife was like, you should do this as a children's book. You should get Kevin and Kristen to illustrate it. And that instantly like put like a visual of like, oh man, we'd seen them. They had just illustrated a book for another local guy, and the artwork was so gorgeous. And I remember going like, wow, that'd be a dream, like to have them do this. And it didn't even hit me, Tristan, until about a year into the book being launched and selling, that I was actually doing the thing that I thought about in high school. And like it sort of came.
You were creating and like
I was creating a piece of art that was actually healing. Yeah. And I say that like humbly, and it was crazy because I still get emails or Facebook messages or Instagram messages from people that are like, this is the only book my child will let me read to them before school.
That's wild. That's awesome.
Before bed.
Yeah.
I was sitting on a plane in Charlotte on the way back from, I was filming something with some guys, and I was on the way back, and the two ladies sit down beside me on the plane. I got like the window seat, and these two ladies, sweethearts, they both sit down. They're like clearly maybe upper 50s or 60s or so. And I don't know, it was one of these like, you never know what a nice gesture will do for somebody. like one of them dropped their glasses and they were both a bit heavy set. And I remember like thinking like, I can get their glasses under their seat easier than they can. So I'm like, hey, I'll get them for you. And she's like, no, it's okay. And she was clearly struggling. I was like, I got this. And so I reach and get her glasses. Well, I had my computer open to some of those illustrations because we were finalizing the artwork for the book at the time. And this lady looks over at me and she's like, hey, what's that? Like, I was like, oh, I'm writing this children's book. And this is the artwork. We're finalizing the stuff. And she's like, well, what's it about? That's so beautiful. And I was like, oh, it's a book about the power of words. And it's this metaphor. It's called Seeds and Trees. And when I said that, she taps her partner. It's like they're in a relationship. She taps this lady and she's like, you got to see this. Look at this, what this guy's writing. And I was kind of uncomfortable because I hadn't really shown it to many people. It's like, it's fairly
so nerve-wracking when especially when it's a stranger, you're just like,
and I don't know what.
Here's my life.
Yeah, it's like, here's my heart.
Yeah.
I mean, just put it on a platter for you to kick or love or whatever. Who knows? And it really was that. It felt really vulnerable. But she's like, can I hold your computer and show her? So like I hand my computer over and I'm literally like, I don't know. And so she's like, is the whole thing here? And I was like, yeah, it's all here. She was, could I read it? And I was like, sure. Yeah. Like, okay.
Hey, I mean, at least like the likelihood of you actually seeing her after that plane ride was very low.
You're right. The chance of she had been like, this is total crap. Yeah. I'm like, okay, no big deal. But she reads it and she starts crying. And she looks over at her partner. She's like, you've got to read this. And then she's like, I want to reintroduce myself. And she introduces herself. She's like, my partner and I are both PhD psychologists. We work with children who've been sexually abused.
Wow.
And I would love to have this book in my practice. And would you let me order this? And suddenly amazing. I was like, she's like, where did you get your training? And I'm like, what
training?
And ultimately, it was so crazy because I'm like, I had no training. I've read a lot, but I'm not like the only time I ever stepped foot in college was to play concerts for people. Mm-hmm. That's like a joke in the sense because I never actually attended college. And I was like, I don't really have any training. She's like, no, clearly you have some training. I was like, I really don't. I was like, I'm a dad. And then she's like, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's a training field in itself.
She was like, you wrote this with the heart of a father.
Oh.
And man, dude, it wrecked me thinking like, here's this lady who, and she even told me, because the book, it's not a Christian book. I mean, in a sense of like, it's all metaphor, but like Christians would read it and go like, oh, that character's probably this. And it's fine. And that's great that happens and stuff. I feel like when I wrote it, it was written the way it was intentionally because I thought it was more for humanity than it was for like, oh, here's a book for the church, And but she picked up on that. She's like, hey, so I'm agnostic, and I can tell maybe one of these characters is like a godlike character. Is that right? And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, the story goes where this friend comes along and helps the prince through cutting down these bad trees. Could I be like that helper with the kids that I work with in the story? Can I tell them?
Wow.
And I was like, yes. Yeah. She goes, you don't think that that's like offensive to God or whatever? And I was like, I don't think God's insecure about that.
No.
I don't think he's really worried about it. And she's like, okay, great. That lady has literally like probably ordered 20 of the books over the past few years. And it was just such a sweet thing to say like, oh, okay, cool. Because when she picked up on the heart of it, that was interesting because I'm writing it. If clearly I'm writing it from my heart, but I didn't really know if it's coming through like that. And at the end of the day, man, I mean, I cannot tell you, honestly, probably 100 letters of, and they're usually like, there's one of two things that happens. There's either like people my parents' age or like 60s and above that say, I was reading this to my grandchild, and suddenly I was like hit with all of these lies that I've believed my entire life. And your book helped me look at this and realize like, oh, I've had bad seeds that I don't have to water. And I've been watering these for 50 years. And now I'm not doing that anymore. And I get these kinds of letters. I'm like, what? This was not for like 60s and up, but cool. That's wild. And then there's the other ones where it's like, you remember Jason and Aaron from So they bought this and they were like, we got this for our baby. And I'm like, it's not a baby book. Yeah. It's really kind of heavy for babies and even elementary at times. And but they bought a copy and they read it. And then they were like talking through real life stuff at night, like as a couple. And then he bought one for his mom. And he was like, dude, my mom needs to read this. And I'm like, who's she going to read it to? He's like, no, this is just for her. Yeah. And like, it's just crazy. There's like these weird moments where you go like, I would have never known where that book was going to go. It's now in like 7 different languages, and
Whoa,
it's in like China.
I didn't know that. That's it's crazy.
It's getting translated in French right now. It's some big publisher in France. Like I have an agent that this lady is so funny because I've literally done nothing to do this. This lady contacted me one day. I was like, I'm a literary agent. I work with like getting people copyright like in other countries and other languages. Would you be willing to let me like try to promote your book? And I'm like, sure. And I thought, nothing's going to come with this. Like 2 weeks later, she's like, so China wants to do it in Korea and blah. And I'm like, what? And like, it's now like in Spanish, it's going to be in French. And there's like 3 or 4 different like Mandarin and all kinds of other stuff, Cantonese and Vietnamese. And it's like, and
that's wild.
That just keeps happening. So it's really cool. I would have never expected that. But it's sold, I think collectively between all the various types, like ebooks and paperback, and it's like sold over 100,000 copies.
Dang.
And it's probably the most successful business thing I've ever done in the sense of grassroots effort of like heart and very limited budget initially to see it blow up and do what it's done. It's wild, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was being like translated to a bunch of different languages.
It's really wild, man.
And what really captivated me was like the effect that it has on people that are not children. Because there's something deep inside of us that, you know, we protect that inner child.
Yeah.
And when something rattles it or disrupts that or something brings change to it, it's crazy how that emotional connect just happens, especially with like literary pieces. And like, I'll be listening to a song or something. I'll be like, I dealt with that. Like as a kid, I dealt with that and I blocked that and I didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
But now this is coming up and I'm pulling over and I'm crying in my car.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I know you're like writing a book right now. Or
I've got several that I'm working on, but yeah.
There's the one with like the man, I just saw it on your Amazon page.
So it's called Man-Child Redefined.
Man-Child Redefined.
Yeah.
But it's like men are not called to be children.
Yeah.
They're called to be childlike.
Yeah.
And when something disrupts that, or like when something comes into that and it activates that childlike heart that we're supposed to have, I don't know, something like it opens up new doorways to deal with your shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so many of us guys and girls, but mostly guys, we are raised to have this like tough bravado.
Yeah.
And we don't have, or we don't feel like we have authority to either deal with our trauma or permission.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to have it dealt with. We're supposed to have it put together.
Yeah.
So with your book coming out, is it come out yet?
It's out. I actually pulled it off the market.
Okay. Cause it was unavailable.
We can talk about that at some point and maybe tonight. Yeah, that book was, it's gosh, I want to make sure I speak right about it. That book put me in therapy, or I should say put me back in therapy, because the whole intent was to actually look at, as a dad, I was looking at my children and realizing there's certain things in their lives that they, like character traits or characteristics in them that I'm like, man, where did that go in me? And why do most adults, especially men, not have that? Like steadily, like we grow out of these things. We mature into not being honest. We become more politically correct. And so we don't just speak the truth. We find nice ways to say something and dumb it down, water it down, whatever. And then we're not telling the truth anymore. And so I'm looking at like, there's permission. Like, you know, one of my friends said a long time ago, like when you're wearing diapers at any age, you have the right to say whatever you want to say. So if you're like a 2-year-old toddler, you're like, that kid's fat or that woman's this. But if you're also 75 years old and you might be wearing diapers or something else, you know, shout out to all the elderly people that wear diapers.
You know, sometimes you just can't control it.
Exactly.
There comes a point where you're just like, all right.
But it's like, if you're at that age, you also have permission because you've lived a long enough life to not really care. You can say whatever the hell you want to say at that point. It's like, I've kind of earned my stripes here. I don't know, like, I'm not trying to appease anybody. But from like 5 to 55 or so, there's this like neutral territory where we start finding like, how do we say this? How do I actually tell this guy that I don't like this? And some of that's into, who knows, there's like a societal thing. I mean, my gosh, I'll probably get canceled after this podcast.
Hey,
but
we've said a bunch of things that we're probably getting canceled anyway. So.
Exactly.
Cancel culture's garbage.
It's so crazy. So I think the idea for that book, which wasn't directly connected to Seeds and Trees, I would have never, first off, I never thought I was going to write a children's book. Never thought I would be introduced as an author. I wrote another book with another local pastor or whatever, and that book, is like another children's book. And then in the process of all of that, I've been writing this thing for several years, just journaling, like, man, what's missing in my life and in other men I talked to, and I kind of just got stuck on this, like, oh man, I think we're missing childlikeness, and what does that look like? How do you do that as a 40-year-old dude, mm-hmm. or as a 25-year-old dude, or as a 60-year-old dude? How do you stay masculine and also stay tender?
Mm-hmm.
And is that a thing? And how do you do that sustainably? So I basically started looking at my children, and I developed through like kind of not interviewing them, but just observing them, like, wow, there's like 8 to 10 character traits that they really seem to have in spades that I think the world would be a better place if most men kept those things. Mm-hmm. But we've kind of drifted. And so I started exploring that. One of the stories in the book, it's kind of a funny thing to think back on. One of my kids, she was maybe 4 or 5 when I was observing this. She was potty trained and was great, and had all that taken care of, just to make the point. But she still needed help whenever she'd go to the bathroom. And by needing help, she needed us to wipe her ass whenever she had poop, and so, or else she wouldn't have got clean. Yeah. And so it became this thing where we still kind of joked about it, because she would walk into the room, like my wife and I would be in the room, and Ruby would come in the room and stand in the doorway and say, "I'm going to go to the bathroom," and we're like, "Oh, okay. Thanks for telling us." And she'd scurry off and go into the bathroom. And a couple minutes later, she would say this, and I'm going to translate it before I say it, because you'll think I'm crazy, but she would say, "I'm all done," but she'd say, "I'm all done." And it was like this, it sounded so Southern, which was not like only 2 of my kids were born in South Carolina, where I'm from. And I've worked really hard to lose the twang and stuff in my voice, but
I love the twang.
Dude,
I listen to country music all the time.
I know. I've just tried to, I have feelings about it, but she's like, "I'm all done." And it was like, it would be like MALL or MAWL, probably DUNN. It's like, "Oh, you're all done." And that was basically her like alert to, "I need you to come in here and help me wipe my ass." Mm-hmm. And so it was so funny. The couple of times, like sometimes my wife would pop up, or if she was on the phone, I'd go help her. And I remember coming in there one day, and it was so strange that this hit me like this, but I walk in and she's sitting on the toilet and she's grinning from ear to ear. Like, she's so happy that I'm coming in there to help her. And she's sitting on the toilet with she just pooped and her ass is dirty. And she's like happy with me coming in there to help her. And I remember going like, oh wow, she's dependent on us to help her do the most trivial task, like cleaning her butt. Mm-hmm. And she's okay with it. Whereas as a dude, I never ask anyone for help. Yeah. Because I am not okay not looking like I don't have everything together. Mm-hmm. And that was just like a, to the face, like, wow, I need to be more willing to be dependent on other people around me. And as I kind of explored that in my own life, sometimes that's like sitting with a dude and being like, "Bro, I'm really going through a hard time." Mm-hmm. And like, I need some support. And like this past year in my life, especially, I've been surrounded by some guys who've been carrying me through, honestly, like the darkest season of my life ever. And lots of you don't even probably know about. It's just been a brutal year. But in that, it's like I'm living out both Seeds and Trees right now in my own life in a hardcore way. It's like Seeds and Trees 2.0. And I'm also living out the Man-Child Redefined book. But at the beginning of last year, my whole world kind of blew up. And I remember I pulled off the book immediately. Man, I was like, this is not me. I actually am not living congruent with this. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel right about trying to market a book that I'm not like in integrity with. It's like, and there was both conceptually, there was areas where as I wrote it, it became a bit of like a flex of a writing experiment. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I don't know how to say this. Not like I'm that great of a writer. It was more like, oh, cool, let's go real deep here. Let's go this. And I was trying to like make it really, really fascinating, where it would have probably been better as like a 80-page book. It's like 280 pages or something stupid. I think if I were to release it again, which I hope to at some point, I probably would have to do a massive revamp on it. Partially because there's a lot of, if you go Enneagram, I don't know if you're, how much that you're
I'm
into.
an Enneagram 8, so.
Okay. So cool. So I'm a 3.
Yeah.
And so as a performer who wants to be seen successful and look at all the things I've done, that book became that in some way. And as a recovering 3 right now that's trying to not perform and trying to actually just be real and be authentic and be who I am, there's a part of me that goes like, yeah, that really reminds me of that guy a lot. And I don't like that. I would like to overhaul it and actually just be more authentic, and say, because that's what the book is actually about. There's some really good stuff in there, and actually I'm really proud of what we created, both like creatively and just like the content. But holistically, it's like, it's not me. It's got my fingerprints in places, but not throughout it. So,
I mean, bravo to you for like having that self-awareness of like, this is not where I'm at right now, so I need to pull this. Like when you could easily make money off of that. Yeah. And market that really well. Yeah, I definitely have spent more on that book than it's netted me. It was only released for a few months before I was like, you know, and a lot of that's, you know, it's a strange thing with identity. You know, when it's funny because usually when people, I was telling my wife, actually, I'm just real talk, before coming here, we were talking, I was in Target parking lot. I just got some stuff. It's when I called you about to see if you had any classes. Yeah. But you didn't. Thank you for Target. Thank you for the whiskey.
You're welcome. We didn't even cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, to good friendship and
absolutely
fun banter at a barista coffee house. But I was talking to my wife and I was like, this is the first interview like this I've done since my world blew up. And I felt really, really uncomfortable. Like, so I'm going to try to live out man-child stuff, be real. So I remember I was telling her, I said, you know, every other time I was asked to do these interviews, they were always like topical, whatever. And I knew going into it, like, oh, we're talking about writing and cool. I've got some stuff on writing. Oh, we're talking about being a father. Oh, cool. I got great stories about a father, and whatever the topic was, I kind of came in armed and ready. And 3s are good at this. We're good at being transparent, but not vulnerable.
What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, there's a great quote in the Man-Child book from a friend of mine who I asked him for permission to write this part because he gave the best visual, like it's a visceral feeling whenever I say this. He said, you know, Brandon, transparency, this is, his name's Steve Brown. He's from Australia. He lives back in Australia now. But Steve, we were talking about the difference because I was like, man, a lot of people were, and I said the word, like I said, a lot of people are really transparent. They're willing to talk about stuff, but you almost feel like they're talking about stuff that they've already figured out. It's easy for a lot of guys to sit down and tell you about the things that they overcame. But that's like a hero story. It's like, cool. Hey, look at this. Let me tell you all the garbage I went through. And that's transparency, and that's great. And it's valid and it's important. And it's nice to connect on that level. But that's not vulnerable. And we misuse the words sometimes or intertwine them. So Steve said, Brandon, transparency is living in a glass house with glass walls, glass ceilings, glass windows, glass doors, and letting anybody see whatever they want. Like, that's cool. Hey, look at me. Here's my life. See this? See all my stuff? He said, vulnerability is inviting all of your neighbors over and handing them a rock. And I was like, what? He's like, then they have something in their hand that could do damage to you. And he was like, usually the difference is found in transparency could be, hey, I'm having a hard time, but I'm mostly okay with this already, or I've already kind of recovered or overcome this. Vulnerability is like, I'm presently having a hard time in this thing, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work out. Now you know something about me that if you were to go and spread this or tell this or what, oh, did you know that? Well, that's potentially damaging. But vulnerability, true vulnerability, man, like that's actually what leads to connection. And so I did this thing in the book when I was writing this section on vulnerability, ironically enough, because I'm having to live it. But there's another guy back in South Carolina. He was one of the mentors at the church I was going to from years ago. And he had this thing that he had this kind of this equation for connection. And this was like when the buzzword in church was community. It still is, but it was like really just first being said.
I remember that time.
Community. Oh, we're forming community. We're creating community.
Let's start a life church or a life group together.
Oh, dude, yeah, we're gonna live in community, and we're gonna have community. And it's like it's great. It makes sense. It's actually right. It's a good thing to pursue. But he had this equation, and he would talk about this from like the pulpit. He'd say, time, and it's super basic, and I'm not mocking him. I actually talked to him about this whenever I referenced it in the book, because I modified his equation. But he would say time plus shared interest equals intimacy. And in a way, like you and I both love barbecue. We ordered barbecue from Kansas City. We had a special moment there. However intimate that was or whatever, it's like, well, we created connection. We did. That's real. We spent some time around a table, I
mean, I specifically remember I was opening up a little bit because with me, it takes a long time of me either roasting you or testing you because I'm an 8. I'm a challenger.
Yeah.
I have to test that relationship before I can trust you.
Yeah.
And I remember at that point, you actually gave me the glass house depiction. And I could not remember for the life of me who told me that.
That's so crazy.
And I've used it in multiple sermons before. Like when I preach for high school and junior hires, I use that specific reference when I'm talking about vulnerability versus transparency.
Yeah.
And the eye-opening.
Shout out to Steve Brown.
Shout out to Steve Brown.
Yeah.
But even you like stewarding that really well of like, and sharing that with me, I think that just completely changed because I was really good at telling people all the crap that I've been in and all the crap that I've been through.
Yeah.
But letting them into the moment of like, if this gets out, it could ruin me.
Yeah.
But I'm trusting you with it because you're my friend and because I want to do life with you and I want to grow deeper with you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like that moment, honestly, I could not thank you for like,
that's so cool that
I literally was going to talk about it. I was going to be like, so did you know?
That would have been such a great moment because it would have tested my humility.
Yeah.
One of my friends, I think my dad might have said this years ago, that the true test of humility is allowing someone to teach you something that you know better. And would you be willing to listen? Like, especially what if it was your own words? Like if you were to say like, dude, there's this great metaphor I heard one day. I'd be like, I told you. Yeah. I would have probably been like, dude, that's my stuff.
Yeah.
I was kidding. It's interesting that's really cool to remember that. I've shared that so many times because it's such a profound depiction of like what it really means to be vulnerable and open up. And like you said, like you could do damage to me by what I'm sharing. And so Rich, the guy that had this time plus shared interest equals intimacy thing, over time hearing him say that, I thought that's mostly true. I mean, and I definitely that's breeding grounds for the potential of connection. But that there's some missing pieces there because like you and I could hang out. We could say every month on the second Thursday of every month, we're going to order barbecue. We're going to spend 2 hours together having barbecue, and we could never talk about anything serious. And then we could leave, and we could call that connection. It'd be the guys that are like, dude, let's do Monday Night Football every Monday night. Yeah. And there might be a dude in there who's like going through a real crisis that never opens up to the other guys because like, oh, this is football night. It's not like these are my football pals or my whatever. And that goes in any context. Like socially, we do that. We think we're creating connection because we have time and shared interest, and that should produce intimacy, connection. So I remember saying to Rich one day, I was like, yeah, but without vulnerability and like real honesty, like we're not really connected. Like who really knows me? Like at the Monday night game, there's 20 of us in the room and whatever. And I'd had those moments where you're kind of sitting around in a crowded room and still feel alone. And you know what I mean? It's like,
Oh, I've felt that many times.
it's like, how is this? All these people here, we're all together, we're all clinking glasses. Our team just won. And yet I'm driving home going like, I don't even know if they give a shit about me.
Yeah.
Like, do they really even know me? And so that over time, I finally, when I injected that, like, what about time plus shared interest plus vulnerability equals intimacy? What was fascinating, and this is, it's weird. I mean, I really want to, I'm trying to share this as like authentically as possible because it feels like like it's some profound thing. But I found that in conversations, sometimes I didn't know if I had a shared interest with somebody, but I had some time and some vulnerability in an elevator. Like I actually it's so funny. I was doing this like social experiment for a few months. I got in an elevator in Charlotte during the filming of this project I was working on. And I got in this elevator with this husband and wife. They were like a young couple, maybe in their early 30s. And I look over at them and I'm like, if there was one thing that was said to you as a child that you wish you could erase, what would it be? This is how I greeted them in the elevator. And the dude's like, whoa, is it going to be like that? And his wife's like, wow, that's crazy. No one's ever asked me something like that before. And we're going to like level 8 or the floor 8. And I'm like, well, you got like 30 seconds. Yeah. Come up with this. The door opens and they haven't answered yet. They're just sort of like, no one's ever asked us a question like that. And they were like, could you step out for a second and let's talk. And let's say, well, so he shares something about something his dad said. And it was like a sports related, like my dad I wasn't good enough and typical kind of father wound stuff. And then she shares something. And whatever she shared was so vulnerable. Like her husband didn't know it. And he was like, honey, like I had no idea that ever happened. And she's like, I've never told anybody. And it was suddenly like, here I'm like, these are two strangers. We had 3.5 minutes together. So I realized, oh, shared interest is irrelevant. Time's kind of irrelevant. Vulnerability is all that matters. Like if we're actually just willing to be vulnerable, cool. If you have more time, great. You can unpack it and spend more time on it. If you've got shared interest, that might make it easier, but it's not essential. You know, ultimately vulnerability is. And so, you know, part of what I'm living now, and it's so crazy, like, as I said, as a 3, this whole past year has been like, you know, I know deconstruction is a big word for people like in faith, but I've actually been like deconstructing my own persona of like, you know, it's weird. I told one of my friends, last summer, I was like, you know, one of the most freeing moments for me is when I stopped believing my own bullshit. And that happened last year for the first time in my life. We'll just go there. Like January of this past year, my wife found out that I'd had an affair and no one knew. Like nobody knew. I had kept everything so hidden and quiet and covered up all the stuff in my life so long. And I was just like, I was walking around like a freaking shell for like a year. The year prior, our marriage was like in this, like, we're existing together, we're surviving life, but this is really hard. And I was completely disconnected, not just from her or from our girls in a way, but just like from my own heart. So much so that, you know, Jim, we were sitting in Jim's office one day. Shout out to Jim.
Jim Bailey, man.
Jim Bailey. My gosh, that dude has been like a life raft for me this past year. Truly. My wife and I are sitting in his office. This is February or March maybe of 2020, right prior to COVID. And already before COVID happened, our marriage was already like in disarray. We were in bad shape. And I remember saying to him one day in the midst of a conversation with my wife and him, and me just, I genuinely, and I don't know if it really was or not, I don't want to sound hokey or whatever, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. I was literally watching myself and my wife and Jim have a conversation. And I felt like I was looking down from the ceiling, seeing this man that was completely disconnected. And I remember saying at one point, like, I need you to pray for me, Jim. I feel like I need like paddles put on my chest or something, like charge, you know, clear kind of moment. I was like, I feel completely flatlined and I don't know how I got here. And it was devastating. In the midst of all the great stuff that's going on in my life, like here's this. And at the time, Like, no, Steffi didn't know about anything, and it was all hidden, and I was trying to cover stuff and somehow recover in the process, and was doing heart work and trying to work through my stuff without telling her about I was working through my stuff. And it's just this long process. And but this past January, basically almost a year later, she confronts me with Jim. I was like, I need you to leave. You're out. And asked me to go stay with my brother. And I went last January to stay with my brother for 6 weeks in South Carolina. And it was like, my brother and I have got really, really tight over the past couple of years, which has been a great like restoration of our friendship. And if that had not been the case, I don't know if I would have survived last year. Real talk. I was thanking God at times that I didn't have a life insurance policy anymore, because I was like, wow, this is real. Like, this is what hopelessness feels like. All the fears that you have as a man, and maybe it's, I don't know if this is the right way to say this, but there seems, and again, maybe this is a bit of a buzzword, but there's like this fear of being seen as a fraud. You hear this guy. A lot of the guys I know don't have that fear if they're not a fraud.
Yeah.
Most of the guys that carry that badge, or there might be some stuff that they're not being honest about, or living in integrity. And I had that fear, big time. I always wanted to poke my chest out and be seen as having my stuff together and being a service or help to other people, and constantly like trying to do. And part of the like, let me do something for Tristan is to keep you from seeing me.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, like I remember when Stephanie said this, I sat honestly, literally in shock in Jim's office. And I just was reciting in my mind, like, oh, my life's over. Like, this is it. This is what it feels like. Everything's going to be gone. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my wife, my kids, business, my name, my status, my whatever, friends and who knows. Everything was on the chopping block at that point. And I genuinely thought, like, oh, this is the end. This is what I've been fearing my entire life. And so, fast forward, and I'm still in it, but fast forward, I go to South Carolina. I'm having these like crazy conversations with my wife, telling her every reason I think I can possibly give her to tell me to leave and to be gone. And my wife, man, dude, this past year, it's weird. I said to Jim at one point that, I've been like a Christian faith kind of guy since I was a little kid. I was raised in the church since I was like 3 years old. And always even felt like I had some kind of relationship with God. But I've never experienced what I've experienced this past year until now. And I mean, like, in moments where it's odd, because there's guys like Jim in my life who most people that know Jim Bailey would speak of him in such a way to say, like, oh, wow, he has like such a father heart, and is able to show the heart of God in a way to young men especially, but I'm sure to men and women, better than most guys I've ever known. I would say I only know a couple people that I even put in that category in my life. And I've got a lot of men over the years that have spoken in my life that I have a lot of respect for. But as far as impact, there's only a couple that I would put in the same category as Jim. And yet, like, the way that I was shown the Father's heart for me more this past year was through my wife than anyone. Stephanie has been like incredibly compassionate in the midst of her own pain, obviously, which pain that I caused, but actually like holding space for me to heal and being like, I'm not in a hurry. I'm also not going anywhere. So take your time and work your stuff out, and let's see if we can salvage this. And Jim told us in his office when I came back in March of last year to start this process, Jim says, if you guys, I don't want to misquote him and get him in trouble, but he basically told us, first off, Stephanie, you have every right to leave Brandon. Like, biblically, socially, whatever. Like, no one's going to blame you for telling him to take a hike. And And she's like, I know. But I didn't sign up for divorce, and I never knew that Brandon was going through some of the stuff he was going through, and I want to give him a chance to heal and to do the right thing. And which is, it's crazy. I don't know if you've met my wife. I think you've met her maybe
a couple times.
She's like 5'2.5", all of like 105 pounds. And she's a freaking giant, man. She just held space this whole past year. We started having really honest conversations. I mean, really honest conversations. When all of your shit is on the table and there is no hiding it, and all the glass walls are breaking around you, then it's terrifying, because you get cut in those kinds of moments, right? It's dangerous. But it's been the most freeing thing in the world. I've spent so much time this past year, excuse me, again, as a 3 who always feels like, I'm a 3 with like a 2 wing, so I like to help. And that's part of how I find my identity and success. Hence all the books and all other stuff. It's so silly. But man, this past year, I spent more time quiet, alone, doing nothing for anyone else other than just being, and actually finding safety and security and identity, and like this sense of, at the Stirring, ironically enough, I've sat in the coffee shop so many times this past year where I would just sit down, put my headphones in, journal some, write some, read, work on whatever I'm working on, and then leave and never have interacted with anybody other than the barista to order my coffee. And 2 years ago, that would have never happened. You would know. I'd walk in, I'd say hello to all the people I know.
I can never have a conversation with you.
There's always people coming around. People come stand by the table. And I'll sit down. I'll Brandon, and I fed off of that, man. It was like such a thrill to feel like, I'm something. I'm helping in some way. And I had this crazy visual this past year when it was in July. I was flying to my brother's 50th birthday in South Carolina, and I get on the plane, sit down, you do the whole seatbelt thing. I put my headphones in, and I'm about to check out for the 3-hour flight or whatever it was at. And, excuse me. And I have this sense of like, I'm supposed to pay attention to the safety briefing. I don't know. I mean, I guess it was God. If I don't really know how to frame that for myself, even much less anyone else. But I had this thought like, I should really pay attention to the safety briefing. And simultaneously, I'm like, that's stupid. I already know what they're going to say. I've been on 1,000 flights. Like, this is so dumb. It's a waste of my time. And I'm just going to check out. And I instantly have the same thought again. So I take my headphones out, and I'm listening to the flight attendant be like, so you do the seatbelt like that and pull this and open it. And I'm like, okay. And she's talking about the safety card and this and the lights and the exit signs. And then she does the oxygen mask thing. And it was so crazy, bro. Like, so crazy. Like, I've only shared this story with like a couple of people because it's so weird. This is a vulnerable, like, embarrassing thing in a way. I had this visual. The moment she starts talking about oxygen mask, I was somewhere else. And I had this visual of, because the whole idea, the theme of that is put your oxygen mask on first, breathe oxygen before you try to help somebody. Like, that makes sense. It also feels weird. It's kind of counterproductive, like counterintuitive. You would feel like, well, that's selfish. I should help Tristan. He needs air. Like, you can't help him if you're not breathing. Duh. But, and I know there's a dad and we've flown with our children before, and there's thoughts of that stuff. And it's like, yeah. But instantly when she started talking about that, Tristan, I had this visual of me, and this was like my everyday life, but at the moment was me walking up and down the aisle of the plane, grabbing people's oxygen masks from them, going, and then saying, you're welcome. And it was like, I was receiving oxygen from them, thinking I was giving them something. And that was my life. And suddenly I was like, oh, I'm getting more from these moments where I think I'm giving. I'm actually giving because I'm getting something, not giving because I just want to give. And I'm giving out of this overflow of my oxygen. I'm suffocating here. I don't actually have a freaking oxygen mask. And if you don't let me breathe yours, I'm going to die. That was my reality. And so yeah, I think last year I just was like, I'm just going to try to keep my oxygen mask on first and foremost. I'm just going to try to breathe and not suffocate. And every once in a while, I'll help someone with theirs, but that's been very few and far between this past year. There's actually a moment in around that same time where I walked in to the coffee shop and there was a guy we both know. I don't want to name him because it might embarrass him, but he was sitting along the window where I was sitting a couple feet away from me. I didn't recognize him. I didn't see him at first. And so I'm just there doing my thing. And he walks over. He's like, dude, I haven't seen you in months. And I hadn't seen him in a while. I'd been gone for a couple months and then I just hadn't seen him in interactions. And so I take my headphones out and I'm greeting him, just trying to be friendly. But I'm also kind of in my stuff. I mean, like last year has been the most brutal freaking year of my life in every way. And so I didn't have anything to give anyways. But I found myself in this moment feeling like he starts sharing some stuff. And I was like, I think he's going through a hard time. It sounds like he might need something, need some encouragement or whatever. And so I'm trying to formulate in my mind while he's talking, like, what could I say to him to encourage him about this particular crisis he's going through? He shared something that's going on in his family. And while he's talking, it feels almost weird to say this. I was fully with him present, hearing him, but I was also simultaneously having like this subconscious conversation in my own head of like, man, God, is there something I could say to this guy to encourage him? Oh, maybe I could tell him such and such story. That might be good, or this. And I'm kind of framing how I would respond. And he finishes that story of this thing that he's going through. And like without a second breath, goes and tells me another crisis. And I'm suddenly in the same moment. And I'm also sort of still thinking about the first one, but now he has this other crisis. And then he's monologuing like I am in a way, but he's monologues for like another 5, 6, 8 minutes. And then he pauses for a second and he tells me another one. And without knowing it, he suddenly shares like 4 or 5 major things that are going on in his life. And I'm juggling in my mind all of these like stories and going, I haven't helped him at all. Like, man, I got to do something. I mean, man, and so like the performer in me that want to help and whatever, that thing's like trying to gear up and I'm literally like barely breathing simultaneously. And I look over at him right as he finishes the last thing, which I don't know it's the last thing, but he does. He finishes this last story. And then he looks at me. He's like, bro, thank you so much for listening to me. Like, this is exactly what I needed, man. I'm sorry to dump all that on you, but I've got to get back to work. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. He pats me on the back, gives kind of a little side hug, like bro hug.
Yeah.
And he walks away. I'm sitting there and I suddenly start weeping. And I mean like full on crying. Because I had this realization like, oh man, all these times I'm trying to find some great value to bring to somebody. I sometimes just need to be there. That's all I need to do. And it was like this massive, oh, I'm enough just being. And so honestly, dude, like this past year, even into the beginning of this year, there's been so many moments where I'm like, yeah, I don't really have much else to give anyone. I don't have capacity for it right now. I don't seek those moments out. I'm just trying to live, trying to survive, trying to make it through this year. And I mean, and for just so I don't leave everybody in the dark, or whatever, like Stephanie and I are doing well. We're on the mend. I proposed to her again a couple of weeks ago, which was really beautiful. I was able to buy her a new ring. It's a long story there, but like we had a really, really special moment. And we're renewing our vows with Jim at the end of March. And they'll be going home for the first time in a year and about 4 months, which is pretty precious. We're doing a second honeymoon and all this stuff.
It's amazing.
It's been a wild ride. Do we need to pause? Are we okay?
We good? Okay. Let me check real quick. No, we're good. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
That was incredible. Like, thank you for being so vulnerable and giving our audience an incredible example of what like true vulnerability looks like. I think what you hit on, especially at the end, was like sometimes we don't have anything to give.
Yeah.
We just need to be there, and
Yeah.
we don't need to fix everyone's problem.
Yeah.
That's not our job, especially when we're running super empty.
Yeah.
We need to be there and just be us. And if we don't have anything to give, we don't have anything to give.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm learning right now, is that I can't control other people.
Mm-hmm.
I can only control me.
Yeah.
And if I'm living a vulnerable lifestyle, and if I'm being the best person that I can possibly be, or if I'm going through shit and I need to talk to someone about it, I have my people that I can talk to. Yeah. Jim Bailey is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
I used to call him the soul snatcher, actually. When I first knew Jim,
yeah,
he would always give me this look, that look.
Oh, yeah.
This look. He'd like point at you and like lowers. I called him the soul snatcher for that, because I felt like every single time he could see into my soul, but really he just knew what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And I think as men,
cared to hear the answers.
Exactly.
So a lot of people are good question askers, but they don't actually really care.
Yeah.
He genuinely cares.
He genuinely cares. Like every session that I've been, or like, I don't want to call it a session. Every hangout with Jim, I'm just like, you actually care about my life.
Yeah.
You'll remember certain things. Like him and I we'll have conversations and we'll carry on. Yeah. Like, because as a barista, you get busy. And that's where I typically saw him, was at the coffee house. So 2 hours later, we just have a random conversation about what we talked about 2 hours earlier. Yeah. But I think as men, caring that deeply about other people is what's going to change the world. Yeah. And is what's going to like take care of our shit and make us grow into who we're called to be. Yeah. Because for me personally, I can smell bullshit from a mile away. Yeah. Yeah. And as soon as I smell that, I don't trust you, and I'm gonna pull back. Yeah. But if you're honest with me, I honestly don't care what you've been through. Yeah. As long as you're honest with me. Yeah. That's what I care about.
It's an interesting thing about masculinity and whether it's the bullshit narrative that we, like I said, me this past year going, I don't even believe the stuff that I've been projecting. This is stupid. I need to dismantle this. It's actually required me to go to people and be like, hey, not only like, it's not like this, let me go tell everybody I've messed up so everybody knows and I can be punished. I thought a lot of that was going to happen. And in a weird way, I haven't received as much of that as I would have ever expected, ironically enough. But some of it has required me going to people and being like, hey, just so you know, like, I wasn't really living authentically in front of you. And even in a way like, hey, I might have portrayed my wife in a way that wasn't honoring to her and accurate. And so like, I genuinely like repent of that. Like, please don't think of me or her that way or whatever. And it's like almost like doing like damage control in a way, not like because I care what people think in a way, but also like, oh, I think it's actually time to be honest about like, and it wasn't actually really, all that wasn't real. What's strange is there's this intertwining thing in like a genuine heart that wants to help, that if shame is involved in that, then like you're finding this like value of your value is contingent on how much good you're maybe doing for someone else. And for me it was, I wrapped all of my, if I wasn't having a conversation with someone that I thought I might say something profound that was helping them, then I would leave feeling like nothing. And this past year, I can't tell you, I mean, honestly, 12 times or more, leaving Kansas City or leaving the Stirring, like after being there for a couple of hours, driving home and crying and going like, I didn't do anything. And yet I actually feel like that was okay. That was enough in a sense. So yeah, I think, and one thing I think honestly, like I've grown in empathy a ton this past year. I've had a handful of guys surround me in a way that I wouldn't have expected, Jim and some others. I've had a ton of people carrying me this past year, and it's actually given me a heart for a lot of other guys that are going through really hard stuff. Right about the time that all this stuff came out with me is right after Carl Lentz had this like affair and everything kind of blew up about him. And I remember like defending that man in a way. like months ago, because someone I knew was kind of talking about him in a pretty derogatory way, like, that piece of crap, he's whatever. And I remember going like, wow, you don't have any idea what the guy's going through, dude. As someone who's like failed in the same way and is not known nearly like that guy is. Like locally, I have this little, my kids think I'm a celebrity, which is sort of funny because people know about the book and it sells in stores and whatever. And so my kids think I'm famous in some way, but I'm like, anywhere else other than Reading, that's not the case. But it's funny because I remember like I immediately felt compassion for him. Not just because like, oh, I can relate with him because he did the same, horrible thing I did. It was like, man, I know the shame I'm feeling locally. Like the fear I had to even go into the coffee shop for weeks and weeks and weeks. Jim Bailey, again, freaking Jim Bailey, literally tells me one day, he's like, Brandon, you've been hiding long enough. This was like 3 or 4 weeks after I got back to Reading. It's maybe April or so. And he was like, you should come to the coffee shop this week. He invited me to church every week and I just kept denying. I was like, nah, no way, buddy. Yeah. Not going to do that. I just couldn't bring myself to show up. And he's like, why don't you meet me for coffee sometime this week? And he says, and text me when you get there. And I was like, why? He was like, I'll come out to the door and I'll greet you at your car and I'll walk in with my arm around you and I'll sit at the table with you and I'll let everybody in that room know that I'm not ashamed of you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to be your friend. I'm proud to be your brother. And bro, even from that statement, it took weeks before I had the courage to take him up on it. But when I did, he greeted me at the door. He literally put his arm around me. We ordered coffee together, I think with his arm around me. We sat down at the table and we just wept together. And all these people around, I'm literally thinking, I say to him and Nate and some other people I know locally that I know are known better than I am. I had lunch with Nate a few weeks ago and I said, hey, thanks for being willing to sit at a table with me. And he's like, what are you talking about, dude? I'm like, my name in this town is not as great anymore. And this is costing you something. And you don't have to sit with me. And I don't take it for granted. I used to. I used to just think like, oh, cool, we're friends. It's great. It's my buddy, Nate. Now we were at a table and there's like another local kind of celebrity folk a couple tables away that saw us, who I know some of these people. And I'm literally thinking like, I don't know that they would probably sit at the table with me, but Nate will. And that's really cool. And so, Carl or these other people, I'm like, man, dude, the amount of shame I've had to claw my way out of this year and shake off just because of my local presence and whatever that is. It almost feels weird to say it. I can't imagine what that guy is dealing with. And I just got a massive heart for him and others. I'm like, people are hurting, dude. I mean, it's one of the most terrifying things to be exposed and one of the most freeing things at the same time. I think what shame has done in my life over the years has kept me from actually knowing what was actually awaiting me when I was uncovered, which was the love of the Father in a way I'd never expressed. And I believed the lie that, dude, this is going to cost you everything. This is going to be this. And for some it does. And I get that. And not everybody has a wife like I do. So there's a part of me that goes, yeah, I'm really, really blessed and I'm really grateful. But it's been the hard road. Jim said to us, this will be the hardest thing you've ever done. And every time I see him, I'm like, you weren't lying.
Yep. You
weren't lying.
Absolutely, man. So that was, I didn't think we were going to go that deep, but I really appreciate it. I love vulnerability and talking about stuff. Yeah. And thank you for trusting me with that in our audience.
Yeah.
What would you say that the hope at the end of it, like once you get past the shame, it's really hard to let go of the shame. Yeah. Because that's what's safe. What would you say the hope at the end of the tunnel, once you let go of that, is?
That's a great question, man. I think, I mean, it's weird. Letting go of shame it's probably a routine, a regular act that you have to do. it's not like, oh, I no longer deal with shame. Like, I mean, I have moments that swell in certain times of the day, certain situations, social situations, where suddenly I'm like, ooh, I feel uncomfortable in this room. I felt uncomfortable coming here. All that stuff. That's shame speaking. Called my wife and me and was like, hey, I'm feeling insecure about this. I used to do this and I'd poke out my chest and be really cool and think I got it all together, and I don't now. And so I think what the hope I have found is that we all belong, first off, that you belong regardless of your condition, you know. And that's a hard one, because as religious people, because I was raised in like a really religious situation, it's like, yeah, I mean, grace is free and salvation's free, but you better get to work and do all these things. And man, dude, just the idea of being accepted. There's a group of guys I was with for years, and they have this mantra that they say is, I see you and I accept you just as you are. And that it's profound, the impact on a man a statement like that can be, if he's free to really fully receive it and to fully be seen. 8-9 years ago when I first heard that, I was willing to be seen a little bit, and so it made a little impact on me. Now, if I was in that same room with guys and I was like, hey, here's all the stuff I wasn't willing to show you, and they said that, I'm sure it'd have a bigger impact on me. So I think the hope is, like, when shame is gone, anything that begins in shame has to be fueled and fed with shame to survive. So the moment you stop feeding shame, you do have to find ways to feed identity and feed compassion and honesty and truth and all those other things. But that doesn't cost us the same. It's not, it's like the transaction, man, dude, it would be silly and trite to say, I wish I had been exposed so long before, because that is the case. It doesn't even feel like that makes up enough. There's not enough weight in that statement. But for my own sake, to encounter what I'm learning about the Father and about myself now, I wish I'd known years and years ago. And I wasn't able to know it and experience it because I wasn't able to be seen. I just wasn't willing. And I think I'm going to ramble, I don't mean to, but we show what we see of the Father and of other things. So I think whatever impact I was able to make up until now, which in times maybe I was making an impact on other people's lives, I think it was limited through the skewed vision I had of who the Father was. And I think now that I'm seeing him clearly, I would hope that I'd be able to show him more clearly. And that's where I think empathy and all that other stuff comes. When you see the absolute mess you are and then still feel received and seen and loved and accepted, then you can't really sit across from a table and judge anyone. Like, if there's anything in me now, it's like, oh, dude, someone could tell me the dirtiest, darkest, worst thing, and I'd be like, bro, okay. Well, I mean, I got you by tenfold, but like, yeah. Really. So yeah, I think the hope is just, man, there's so much freedom in just being honest, dude.
Just be honest.
Just being honest.
Yeah.
Being authentic, being real, being willing to be seen, and finding your people that can accept that. Like,
yeah, I would say for our audience, if you don't have a healthy group of people that you can share that with, it will only tear you down more. When you open up to people that are healthy and are self-aware, I feel like that can bring freedom to you.
Yeah.
I feel like it can bring freedom to any, like, literally, if anyone comes to me and talks to me about their life, I don't care what you've been through. Yeah. Because I've been through the ringer. I've been through, verbal abuse. I've been through physical abuse. I've, like, from my own dad. I've been through manipulation. I've been through it all. Yeah. I mean, right now, I'd say that I'm working through a lot. Yeah. And getting rid of that shame so I can live in freedom. Yeah. But I mean, it's all, like, I know co-host slash producer Eli, I can talk to him about stuff
Yeah.
all the time. I can talk to my buddy Isaac.
Yeah.
I can talk to Brandon if I need to. Like, find a healthy group of people that you can be authentic and vulnerable with.
Yeah. And
it's a safe place for you to do it. Or else you're just going to live in shame and it's not going to be fun. Like, you're always going to be looking over your back, looking over to see if someone's out to get you. When you live in authentic freedom and authentic happiness, that's a game changer. Yeah. That's what our world needs is happiness and joy and peace. Yeah. And you can't live with that with shame.
Yeah. It's impossible. I tried.
It's impossible.
I tried a lot.
And, when you're going through that and you're receiving praise and you're receiving, other people's attention, it's really easy to dig that down because you think you're getting all of that. Yeah. When it's fake. Like, it's you're feeding an ego inside of you that is not healthy. Yeah. So thank you for that story. Like, that's super vulnerable. And I love that about you. Like, I can have any conversation with you. Yeah. I wish, I feel like you could talk to you for hours. Like, it's just like a big brother, slash father talk. Yeah. But unfortunately we don't have that kind of time. It's all good. But thank you, Brandon. Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on this podcast and honestly opening up doors to other men or other people in general. Yeah. That will benefit from this.
Cool, man.
I always open up for my guests at the end of the podcast a dad advice / dad quote that you would offer them. So if you'd like, you can be more than happy to hear it.
See, it will sound really silly, maybe borderline arrogant to quote myself, but I'm going to quote myself for a second because I'm living through the essence of what Seeds and Trees was about. When I first wrote that, I had this phrase go through my mind: "Be careful what you water, for it will surely grow." And it's really where I'm at right now. Like, there's been a lot of trees in my life, if you will, the garden of my heart or the forest, whatever I created, that were just choking the life out of all the other good ones. And I secretly and sometimes subconsciously watered those things. I think we have to be careful really with like what we water, what lies we water, what truths we water. And like what you were saying, like, find people that are going to like water the good trees, like the fruit in your life. And not the ones that are going to remind you of and always point out all the bad things and keep you in that place. And it's hard. It's hard to do that, but yeah, be careful what you water, for it will surely grow, because it's true.
Words of wisdom from Brandon Walden himself. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to the Mancave podcast. I'm Tristan Brudeman, and this is with Brandon Walden. Thank you guys.